It was a typical Tuesday morning at Atlanta's busy airport. The 8:30 a.m. flight to New York was boarding, and passengers were making their way down the narrow aisle with their carry-on bags. Among them was a young man in his early 20s, wearing a simple gray hoodie and dark jeans. He looked tired, probably from getting up early for the flight. His name was Tyler, and he had just finished visiting his grandmother in Atlanta. She had been in the hospital for a few weeks, and he wanted to spend some time with her before heading back to New York for work. Tyler was a quiet person who preferred to keep to himself, especially when traveling. As he walked onto the plane, Tyler checked his boarding pass one more time. Seat 2A, first class. He had been lucky enough to get an upgrade through his frequent flyer miles. After all those business trips over the years, the airline finally gave him something nice. But as Tyler approached the first-class section, a flight attendant stepped directly in his path. Her name tag read Linda, and she had been working for the airline for over 15 years. She looked at Tyler with a suspicious expression, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. "Excuse me," Linda said, her voice sharp and unfriendly. "I think you might be lost." "Economy class is toward the back of the plane." Tyler looked confused for a moment. He glanced down at his boarding pass, then back at Linda. "Actually, I'm in first class. Seat 2A. He held up his boarding pass to show her. Linda barely looked at the pass. Instead, she crossed her arms and shook her head. "I need to see that boarding pass properly." "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" Other passengers were starting to notice the conversation. An older businessman in an expensive suit walked past them easily, and Linda smiled warmly at him. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard." But when she turned back to Tyler, her face changed completely. Tyler handed her his boarding pass, staying calm despite feeling uncomfortable. He had dealt with situations like this before, and he knew getting upset would only make things worse. "Here you go. Seat 2A, first class." Linda studied the boarding pass for much longer than necessary, turning it over in her hands as if looking for something wrong with it. Finally, she handed it back to him, but her expression didn't change. "This seems unusual," she said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "How did you afford first class?" The question hit Tyler like a punch to the stomach. He felt his face get warm, but he kept his voice steady. "I used my frequent flyer miles for an upgrade." "Frequent flyer miles?" Linda repeated as if the idea was impossible. "Do you travel for business often?" Tyler nodded. "Yes, I do. Several times a month, actually." Linda looked him up and down again, clearly not believing him. "What kind of business?" By now, several passengers had stopped to watch what was happening. Tyler could feel their eyes on him, and he wished he could just disappear into his seat. He didn't want to cause a scene, but Linda seemed determined to make this difficult. "I work in consulting," Tyler said quietly, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Consulting?" Linda repeated with a smirk. "Right. Well, I'm going to need to verify this with my supervisor. Please step aside and let the other passengers board." Tyler moved to the side, watching as other passengers walked past him into first class. A young woman about his age, wearing ripped jeans and a tank top, showed her boarding pass to Linda and was welcomed with a smile. An elderly man in casual clothes got the same friendly treatment. After about 10 minutes, Linda returned with another flight attendant. They whispered to each other while looking at Tyler, then Linda approached him again. "We've decided you can take your seat," she said, as if she was doing him a huge favor. "But I'll be watching you during the flight. First-class passengers are expected to behave appropriately." Tyler felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I always behave appropriately," he said quietly. He made his way to seat 2A and sat down, hoping the worst was over. But Linda wasn't finished with him yet. Throughout the boarding process, she kept walking past his seat, checking on him, and making comments to other flight attendants. When it was time for the safety demonstration, Linda stood right next to Tyler's row. As she went through the safety instructions, she kept looking at him as if he might cause trouble at any moment. About 30 minutes into the flight, Tyler called the flight attendant button to ask for a glass of water. Linda came over looking annoyed. "What do you need?" she asked in a tone that suggested he was bothering her. "Could I please have some water?" Tyler asked politely. Linda sighed dramatically. "We're not at drink service yet. You'll have to wait like everyone else." Tyler looked around and noticed that other passengers in first class already had drinks. The businessman across the aisle was sipping coffee, and the woman behind him had orange juice. "I see other people already have drinks," Tyler said calmly. Could I please just get some water? Linda's face turned red with anger. Are you questioning how I do my job? I told you to wait, and that means wait. This is first class, not some place where you can make demands. The entire first class section was now watching them. Tyler felt embarrassed and frustrated, but he tried one more time to be reasonable. I'm not making demands. I'm just asking for water. The same service you've given other passengers. That's when Linda completely lost control. Listen here, she said, raising her voice so the whole section could hear. I don't know who you think you are or how you got that ticket, but you don't belong here. You're causing problems and disturbing other passengers. Tyler stood up slowly, his face calm but his hands shaking slightly. I'm not causing any problems. I've been polite and respectful. I just asked for water. Don't you dare stand up to me, Linda shouted. Sit down right now or I'll have you removed from this plane. The other passengers were staring now, some of them filming with their phones. Tyler could see the shock on their faces. He had done nothing wrong, but Linda was treating him like a criminal. I am sitting down, Tyler said, lowering himself back into his seat. I just want to finish this flight in peace. But Linda was beyond reason now. Something about Tyler's calm response made her even angrier. Before anyone could react, she raised her hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin. Everyone gasped. Tyler's cheek stung and he could feel it turning red, but he didn't move. He just sat there looking at Linda with a mixture of shock and disappointment. Linda seemed to realize what she had done, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. That's what happens when you don't know your place, she said, her voice shaking. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were steady now and his voice was calm when he spoke. I need to make a phone call, he said. He dialed a number and waited. When someone answered, Tyler spoke quietly but clearly. Dad, it's me. We need to talk. Something just happened on my flight and you're not going to believe it. The phone rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. Tyler, how's your flight going, son? Robert Johnson was sitting in his corner office on the 45th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, looking out at the city skyline. He had been reviewing financial reports when his son called, but something in Tyler's voice immediately caught his attention. Dad, I need to tell you what just happened, Tyler said quietly, glancing around at the other passengers who were still staring at him. A flight attendant just hit me. She slapped me across the face in front of everyone. Robert's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. She did what? She's been harassing me since I got on the plane, Tyler continued, his voice steady but tired. She didn't think I belonged in first class. She questioned how I could afford the ticket, made me wait while other passengers got service, and when I asked for water, she completely lost it. Robert stood up from his desk, his jaw tightening. In his 60 years of life, he had faced discrimination many times, but he thought things had gotten better. Apparently, he was wrong. Tell me exactly what happened from the beginning. Tyler explained the entire incident while Linda pretended to be busy with other passengers, clearly nervous about the phone call. The other flight attendants were whispering among themselves, and some passengers were still recording with their phones. She said I didn't know my place. Dad. In front of everyone, Robert closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had worked his entire life to build something better for his family, and here was his son being treated like this in 2024. It brought back memories of his own father's stories about the old days, stories he hoped his children would never have to live through. What airline is this? Robert asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. Skyward Airlines, Flight 847. Robert walked to his computer and opened up a file marked Investment Portfolio. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he searched for information. What he found made his expression change completely. Johnson Investment Group didn't just have money in Skyward Airlines. They owned 38% of the company. Robert had bought the shares 5 years ago when the airline was struggling, seeing it as a good long-term investment. He had helped save the company from bankruptcy, and now they were treating his son like this. Tyler, I want you to stay calm and document everything. Get the names of any witnesses who are willing to talk. I'm going to handle this. Dad, I don't want you to make a big deal out of this. I just want to get home. Son, this is already a big deal. What happened to you today isn't just wrong, it's illegal. And if they're treating you this way, they're treating other people this way too. Robert was already pulling up more files on his computer. Johnson Investment Group was one of the largest black-owned investment firms in the country. Robert had started the company with nothing but a business degree and a dream, working 18-hour days for decades to build it into what it was today. He had faced his own share of discrimination along the way. People who didn't want to work with him because of his race, banks that wouldn't give him loans, investors who didn't take him seriously, but he had persevered, and now he controlled billions of dollars in assets. Tyler, I'm going to make some calls. Just finish your flight and come straight to my office when you land. Okay, Dad, I love you. I love you too, son. And Tyler, what happened today wasn't your fault. Remember that. After hanging up, Robert sat back in his chair and stared at his computer screen. Skyward Airlines. He had helped build that company back up when they were struggling. He had believed in their potential and invested heavily in their future. And this is how they treated his family. Robert picked up his phone and called his assistant. Patricia, I need you to cancel my meetings for the rest of the day and get me everything we have on Skyward Airlines. Financial reports, board member information, management structure, everything. Right away, Mr. Johnson, is everything okay? No, it's not. But it will be. Next, Robert called his legal team. The law firm of Morrison & Associates had been working with Johnson Investment Group for over 10 years, handling everything from corporate acquisitions to civil rights cases. David Morrison speaking. David, it's Robert Johnson. I need you to drop everything and focus on something for me. My son was just assaulted on a Skyward Airlines flight, and I want to know every legal option we have. David Morrison had known Robert for years and had never heard him sound this angry. Assaulted? Are you serious? Dead serious. A flight attendant hit him after harassing him for being in first class. I want this investigated immediately, and I want to know about every complaint they've ever received about discrimination. I'll get my team on it right now. We'll have preliminary information by tomorrow morning. Robert's next call was to James Crawford, his head of investor relations. James, I need you to quietly reach out to our contacts at other investment firms. Find out what they know about Skyward Airlines' internal policies and any discrimination issues. Sure thing, Robert. Are you thinking about pulling our investment? I'm thinking about a lot of things right now. By the time Tyler's flight landed in New York, Robert had already set several things in motion. He had his legal team researching discrimination cases involving Skyward Airlines. He had his financial team reviewing the company's management structure and board composition. And he had his public relations team on standby, though he hoped it wouldn't come to that. Robert also made a personal call to Gerald Hayes, the CEO of Skyward Airlines. They had met several times over the years during board meetings and investor conferences. Gerald had always seemed like a reasonable man, but Robert was about to find out just how reasonable he really was. Gerald, this is Robert Johnson from Johnson Investment Group. Robert, good to hear from you. How are things going? Not well, Gerald. Not well at all. My son was just assaulted by one of your flight attendants on Flight 847 from Atlanta to New York. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, did you say assaulted? I said assaulted. Your flight attendant hit my son after spending the entire boarding process harassing him for being in first class. She questioned how he could afford the ticket, denied him service that she gave to other passengers, and then slapped him when he asked for water. Robert, I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Our flight attendants are trained professionals who would never. Gerald, there were dozens of witnesses. Some of them filmed it. There's no misunderstanding here. Gerald's tone changed immediately. He knew exactly who Robert Johnson was and how much influence he had. Of course, we'll investigate this immediately. Can you give me the details? Robert provided all the information Tyler had given him, including the flight attendant's name and seat number. He could hear Gerald typing on his computer as they talked. I'll personally look into this, Robert. If what you're saying is true, we'll take appropriate action. Gerald, let me be very clear about something. Johnson Investment Group owns 38% of your company. We helped save Skyward Airlines when you were on the verge of bankruptcy 5 years ago. I believed in your company's potential and your leadership. Robert, I appreciate everything you've done for— I'm not finished, Robert interrupted. What happened to my son today tells me that there are serious problems with your company's culture and training. This isn't just about one flight attendant having a bad day. This is about systemic issues that need to be addressed immediately. Gerald was quiet for a moment, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. What do you want me to do? I want a full investigation within 24 hours. I want to know about every discrimination complaint your company has received in the past 5 years. I want to know what training your employees receive about treating all passengers with respect, and I want to know what you're going to do to make sure this never happens again. Consider it done. Gerald, my family has faced discrimination before, but I thought we were past this kind of behavior in 2024. Apparently I was wrong, but I promise you this. What happened to my son today will not happen to another passenger on your airline. One way or another, things are going to change. After Robert hung up, he sat in his office as the sun began to set over Manhattan. He thought about his own father, who had worked 2 jobs to put Robert through college. He thought about all the obstacles he had overcome to build his company. And he thought about his son, who shouldn't have to deal with this kind of treatment in today's world. Robert opened his laptop and began typing an email to his board of directors. By morning, everyone would know what had happened, and they would all be ready to take action. Because Robert Johnson hadn't built his empire to watch his family be disrespected. He had built it to make sure they never had to face the same struggles he did. And now, Skyward Airlines was about to learn exactly what that meant. The next morning, Robert Johnson's office looked like a war room. Legal documents covered every surface, and his team of lawyers, investigators, and financial analysts had been working through the night. Coffee cups and takeout containers showed evidence of their dedication to the task at hand. David Morrison, Robert's lead attorney, walked into the office carrying a thick folder. His usually perfect suit was wrinkled and his tie was loose around his neck. He'd been up all night reviewing documents and making phone calls. "Robert, you need to see this," David said, placing the folder on the desk. What happened to Tyler wasn't an isolated incident. Not even close. Robert looked up from his computer where he had been reviewing Skyward Airlines employee training materials. "What did you find?" "In the past 3 years alone, we've discovered 47 formal complaints filed against Skyward Airlines for discrimination." 47, Robert. And those are just the ones that were officially reported. Robert's expression darkened as David opened the folder and spread out the documents. Each page represented someone who had been treated poorly because of their race, religion, or appearance. "Tell me about the flight attendant who hit Tyler," Robert said. "Linda Watson, 15 years with the company. She's been the subject of 12 separate complaints in the past 5 years. Passengers accused her of being rude to minorities, questioning their tickets, and providing poor service based on their appearance." 12 complaints? And she's still working?
"Gets better," David continued.
Or worse, depending on how you look at it. In every case, the airline's response was the same. They would apologize to the passenger, maybe offer them some frequent flyer miles, and then transfer Linda to a different route for a few months. No real consequences, no additional training, nothing. Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street below. "What about management? Did anyone try to address the pattern?" "That's where it gets interesting," David said, pulling out another set of documents. 3 different supervisors flagged Linda's behavior over the years. 2 of them recommended additional training or disciplinary action, but their recommendations were overruled by higher management. By who? Regional Manager Kevin Thompson and HR Director Michelle Barnes. Both of them have been with the company for over 20 years. According to our sources inside the company, they have a reputation for protecting employees who've been there a long time, regardless of their behavior. Robert's assistant, Patricia, knocked on the door and entered. "Mr. Johnson, I have Gerald Hayes from Skyward Airlines on line 1. He says it's urgent." Robert picked up the phone. "Gerald, I hope you have good news for me." "Robert, I've completed the initial investigation into yesterday's incident. I've spoken with the crew, reviewed the passenger statements, and watched the video footage from passengers' phones. And? The flight attendant, Linda Watson, has been suspended pending a full review. I want you to know that her behavior was completely unacceptable and doesn't represent our company values." Robert looked at David, who was shaking his head. "Gerald, what can you tell me about Linda Watson's history with the company?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "She's been with us for 15 years. Generally a reliable employee." "Generally reliable? Gerald, she's been the subject of 12 discrimination complaints in 5 years. Did you know that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Robert, I'm looking into all aspects of this situation." "Let me save you some time," Robert said, his voice getting colder. "My legal team has already done the investigation. We know about the 47 complaints your company has received. We know about the pattern of ignoring these complaints. And we know about the managers who have been protecting employees like Linda Watson. Gerald's voice became strained. Robert, we're dealing with this appropriately. Linda has been suspended and we're reviewing our policies. Suspended isn't enough, Gerald. And reviewing your policies isn't enough. Your company has a systemic problem, and yesterday my son became another victim of that problem. What do you want me to do? Robert looked at the documents spread across his desk, each one representing someone who had been mistreated. I want Linda Watson fired immediately. I want Kevin Thompson and Michelle Barnes removed from their positions. And I want a complete overhaul of your company's training and complaint process. Robert, I can't just fire people without following proper procedures. We have employee contracts and union agreements to consider. Gerald, let me remind you of something. Johnson Investment Group owns 38% of your company. That makes me your largest shareholder. When I make recommendations about how the company should be run, those aren't suggestions. They're requirements. The line went quiet for a long moment. I'll see what I can do. You'll do more than see, Gerald. You'll get it done, and you have 48 hours. After hanging up, Robert turned to David. What's our legal position here? Strong, David replied immediately. Tyler was assaulted in front of witnesses. The airline has a documented history of allowing this behavior to continue. We could file both criminal and civil charges. What about the company itself? Can we hold them responsible for the pattern of discrimination? Absolutely. With 47 documented complaints and evidence that management ignored them, we have a clear case of corporate negligence. The Department of Transportation might also be interested in investigating their practices. Robert's phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler. Dad, people are posting videos of what happened online. It's starting to go viral. Robert looked at the message and realized that the situation was about to get much bigger. He called his public relations director, Amanda Foster. Amanda, I need you to monitor social media for anything related to Skyward Airlines and yesterday's incident with Tyler, and prepare a statement from our company. What kind of statement? We're going to announce that Johnson Investment Group is deeply concerned about discrimination practices at Skyward Airlines, and we're taking action to address them. Within hours, the videos from Tyler's flight were being shared thousands of times across social media platforms. The hashtag Skyward Shame began trending, and news outlets started picking up the story. Robert watched the coverage from his office, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. He was satisfied that the issue was getting attention, but sad that it took a viral video to make people care about discrimination that had been happening for years. By late afternoon, Robert's team had uncovered even more disturbing information. James Crawford, his head of investor relations, came into the office with a grim expression. Robert, I've been talking to contacts at other investment firms. Skyward Airlines' discrimination problems are an open secret in the industry. What do you mean? 3 other major investors have had similar experiences with the airline. One of them had a board member's daughter treated poorly on a flight last year. Another had an executive from their company denied service in first class. And they didn't say anything. They complained privately, got apologies and compensation, and moved on. Nobody wanted to make it a public issue. Robert shook his head. This was exactly the problem. When people with power and influence stayed quiet about discrimination, it allowed the behavior to continue for those who didn't have the same resources to fight back. James, I want you to reach out to those investors, let them know we're taking action, and ask if they want to join us. You're thinking about a coordinated response? I'm thinking about making sure this never happens again. Not just to my family, but to anyone. That evening, Robert met with Tyler at their family's apartment on the Upper East Side. Tyler looked tired but determined as he sat across. From his father in the living room, they had shared countless conversations in over the years. Dad, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. Part of me just wants to forget about it and move on. Robert studied his son's face. But another part of you doesn't want to forget about it. Right. I keep thinking about all the other people who might go through the same thing. People who don't have the resources to fight back like we do. Robert smiled proudly. This was why he had worked so hard to build his company. Not just to accumulate wealth, but to raise children who understood their responsibility to help others. Tyler, what happened to you yesterday was wrong, but you're right that it's happened to other people too. And it will keep happening unless someone stands up and demands change. So what do we do? Robert leaned forward. We use every resource we have to make sure Skyward Airlines becomes the kind of company that treats all passengers with respect. And then we make sure other airlines learn from their example. Even if it means taking on a major corporation, son, we don't just have money invested in that corporation. We own a piece of it. That gives us the power to demand change. And sometimes power isn't worth having unless you're willing to use it for the right reasons. Tyler nodded, understanding the weight of what his father was saying. What happens next? Tomorrow, we're going to have a very important meeting with Gerald Hayes and his board of directors. They're going to learn that discrimination isn't just morally wrong. It's also very expensive. Robert looked out the window at the lights of Manhattan, thinking about all the people who had been treated poorly by Skyward Airlines over the years. Tomorrow, that was going to start changing. And if Gerald Hayes and his team didn't want to change voluntarily, Robert was prepared to force the issue, because some things were more important than profit margins and employee contracts, and treating people with basic human dignity was one of them. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Skyward Airlines headquarters had never felt so tense. Gerald Hayes sat at the head of the long mahogany table, adjusting his tie nervously as he waited for Robert Johnson to arrive. Around the table sat the airline's executive team, all of them acutely aware that their jobs might be on the line. "He'll be here any minute," Gerald said, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "Remember, we need to handle this delicately. Johnson Investment Group is our largest shareholder." Kevin Thompson, the regional manager who had repeatedly ignored complaints about Linda Watson, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maybe we're overreacting. It was just one incident." Michelle Barnes, the HR director, shot him a sharp look. "Kevin, there were 12 complaints about Watson. 12. And now it's all over social media." "The stock price dropped 8% yesterday," added Chief Financial Officer Maria Santos. "Our investors are getting nervous." The door opened and Robert Johnson walked in, followed by his son Tyler and attorney David Morrison. Robert wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. Tyler looked calm but determined, while David carried a briefcase that everyone in the room knew contained documents that could destroy careers. "Gerald," Robert said, extending his hand for a brief handshake. "Thank you for arranging this meeting on short notice." "Of course, Robert. Please have a seat." Gerald gestured to the chairs across from him, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. Robert remained standing. "Before we sit down, I'd like you to meet my son Tyler, the young man your employee assaulted 2 days ago." The room fell silent. Several executives looked down at their hands, unable to meet Tyler's eyes. Kevin Thompson's face had gone pale. "Tyler," Robert continued, "would you like to tell them what happened on Flight 847? Tyler stood next to his father, his voice clear and steady. "Your flight attendant, Linda Watson, questioned whether I belonged in first class from the moment I stepped on the plane. She made me show my boarding pass multiple times, asked how I could afford the ticket, and denied me service that she freely gave to other passengers." Gerald started to speak, but Robert held up his hand. When Tyler politely asked for water, Robert continued, "Something every first-class passenger has a right to request." Linda Watson lost control and slapped him across the face, in front of dozens of witnesses. "Mr. Johnson," Gerald began, "I want to apologize for—" "Gerald, I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for answers and solutions." Robert finally sat down, but his posture remained formal and intimidating. "David, would you please share what our investigation found?" David Morrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "In the past 3 years, Skyward Airlines has received 47 formal complaints alleging discrimination based on race, religion, or appearance. Linda Watson alone has been the subject of 12 complaints." Kevin Thompson tried to defend himself. "We investigated every complaint thoroughly." "No, you didn't," David interrupted, pulling out specific documents. "You routinely dismissed complaints, offered minimal compensation to keep passengers quiet, and transferred problematic employees to different routes instead of addressing their behavior." Michelle Barnes leaned forward. "We followed proper HR procedures in every case." "Your proper procedures," Robert said, his voice rising slightly, "allowed a racist employee to assault my son. Your proper procedures have been protecting discrimination for years." Gerald raised his hands, trying to regain control of the meeting. "Robert, we've already suspended Linda Watson pending a full investigation. We're taking this seriously." Suspended? Tyler spoke up for the first time since telling his story. She physically attacked me after harassing me for an hour. In any other workplace, that would result in immediate termination and criminal charges. Robert pulled out his phone and showed Gerald the screen. Do you know what this is, Gerald? It appears to be a stock market app. It's your company's stock price. Down 12% since yesterday. And it's going to keep falling as long as this story stays in the news. Robert put his phone away and leaned forward. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that my company owns 38% of your airline, which means your problems are my problems. Maria Santos, the CFO, spoke up nervously. Mr. Johnson, what would you like us to do to resolve this situation? Robert looked around the table, making eye contact with each executive. Linda Watson needs to be terminated immediately. Not suspended, terminated. Kevin Thompson and Michelle Barnes need to be removed from their positions for failing to address the pattern of discrimination complaints. Kevin's face turned red. You can't just fire me because of one incident. One incident? David Morrison pulled out another document. Mr. Thompson, you personally overruled 3 supervisor recommendations to discipline Linda Watson. You ignored complaints about her behavior for 5 years. I was protecting a longtime employee. You were protecting a racist, Tyler said quietly, and enabling her to hurt other people. Gerald shifted in his seat. Robert, we have employee contracts and union agreements to consider. I can't just fire people without following proper procedures. Robert's expression hardened. Gerald, let me explain something to you. When I invested in this company 5 years ago, you were 3 months away from bankruptcy. My money saved your airline. My confidence in your leadership convinced other investors to stick with you. The room was completely silent now. But my investment came with expectations, Robert continued. I expected you to run a company that treats all customers with respect and dignity. I expected you to hire and promote based on merit, not prejudice. And I expected you to address problems when they arose, not sweep them under the rug. Gerald's voice was barely above a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you can't run this company according to those basic principles, then maybe you shouldn't be running it at all. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Everyone in the room understood that Robert Johnson had the power to remove Gerald as CEO if he chose to exercise it. Robert, Gerald said carefully, what do you want us to do? Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the airport in the distance. I want Linda Watson fired today. I want Kevin Thompson and Michelle Barnes removed from their positions by the end of the week. I want a complete review of your hiring and training practices, and I want a new system for handling discrimination complaints that actually addresses the problems instead of hiding them. That's a lot of changes, Gerald stammered. Gerald, that's just the beginning. Robert turned back to face the table. I also want you to hire an outside consultant to review every employee who has received multiple complaints. I want mandatory bias training for all staff, not just a 1-hour video that people can sleep through. And I want a passenger advocate position created to ensure that complaints are handled properly. Michelle Barnes found her voice. Mr. Johnson, these changes will be expensive and time-consuming. Michelle, do you know what's expensive? Lawsuits, bad publicity, lost customers, decreased stock prices. Robert returned to his seat. Do you know what else is expensive? Having to find a new airline to invest in because this one can't treat people properly. Tyler had been quiet during most of the exchange, but now he leaned forward. I want to add something. Yesterday wasn't just about me. It was about every person of color who has been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. He looked around the table. I could afford first class because my father built a successful company. But what about the people who save up for months to upgrade their seats for a special occasion? What about business travelers who earn upgrades through their work? They shouldn't have to prove they belong there based on their skin color. Gerald nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, Tyler. What happened to you was inexcusable. Then prove it, Robert said. Make the changes I've outlined. Show your customers and your investors that Skyward Airlines is committed to treating everyone with respect. And if we agree to these changes, Gerald asked, then Johnson Investment Group will continue to support your company. We'll work together to make Skyward Airlines a model for how the industry should operate. And if we don't agree? Robert's smile was cold. Then you'll find out what happens when the largest shareholder in your company decides to take their business elsewhere. And trust me, Gerald, other investors tend to follow my lead. The meeting lasted another 2 hours as they worked through the details of the changes Robert was demanding. By the end, Gerald had agreed to everything, though it was clear he felt like he had no choice in the matter. As Robert, Tyler, and David prepared to leave, Gerald made one last attempt to salvage his relationship with his largest investor. "Robert, I hope you know that what happened to Tyler doesn't represent our company values." Robert paused at the door. "Gerald, a company's values aren't what they put on their website or in their mission statement. A company's values are what they do when they think nobody important is watching." He looked back at the executives sitting around the table. "For years you thought nobody important was watching, while your employees discriminated against passengers. But everyone is important, Gerald. Every single passenger who pays for a ticket deserves to be treated with dignity. Yesterday you found out that somebody was watching who had the power to hold you accountable. Let's make sure that from now on, you act like everybody is watching, because they are." As they walked out of the building, Tyler turned to his father. "Do you think they'll actually follow through on the changes?" Robert smiled. "They will if they want to keep their jobs. And if they don't, we'll find people who will." Tyler nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction he hadn't expected. What had started as a humiliating experience on an airplane was turning into something much bigger, something that might actually help other people avoid going through what he had experienced. "Dad, thank you for standing up for me." "Tyler, I didn't just stand up for you. We stood up for everyone who has been treated poorly because of prejudice and discrimination. And we're going to keep standing up until this kind of behavior becomes unthinkable." As they walked away from Skyward Airlines headquarters, neither of them realized that their fight for change was just beginning. Because changing one company's policies was only the first step in changing an entire industry's culture. 6 months later, Tyler walked through the same airport where his ordeal had begun. But everything felt different now. The Skyward Airlines terminal buzzed with activity, but there was something new in the air. Something he could see in the way employees interacted with passengers, regardless of their age, race, or appearance. "Good morning, sir," said a flight attendant at the gate, smiling warmly at an elderly man in worn clothes. "Let me help you find your seat." Tyler watched the interaction with satisfaction. This was what change looked like in practice, not just on paper. His father, Robert, had kept his word about transforming Skyward Airlines, but the process hadn't been easy. Gerald Hayes had initially tried to implement the minimum changes possible, hoping to satisfy Robert without making real structural improvements. That approach had lasted exactly 2 weeks when Robert discovered that Linda Watson had been quietly transferred to another department instead of being fired. He had called an emergency board meeting. Within 48 hours, Linda was terminated, Gerald was demoted to a regional position, and a new CEO was appointed. Someone who understood that treating customers with respect wasn't just morally right, it was good business. The new CEO, Patricia Williams, had no relation to Robert despite sharing a last name. She was a former executive from a competing airline who had built her reputation on customer service excellence and employee development. Her first act was to personally apologize to Tyler and every other passenger who had filed discrimination complaints over the past 5 years. But Patricia understood that apologies weren't enough. Real change required systemic transformation. The company's entire training program was rebuilt from the ground up. Every employee, from baggage handlers to senior executives, went through comprehensive bias awareness training. Not the old 1-hour video that people could ignore, but intensive workshops that forced participants to confront their own prejudices and learn how to serve all customers effectively. Kevin Thompson and Michelle Barnes had been replaced by younger, more diverse leaders who brought fresh perspectives to their roles. The new HR director, Carlos Rodriguez, had implemented a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and created multiple channels for employees and passengers to report problems. Most importantly, they had established the position of passenger advocate, exactly as Robert had demanded. The advocate was an independent voice within the company, whose job was to investigate complaints and ensure they were handled fairly and thoroughly. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text message from his father. "How does it look?" Tyler typed back. "Like a completely different airline." And it was. Customer satisfaction scores had increased by 40%. Employee morale was at an all-time high, partly because the company was now attracting workers who genuinely wanted to provide excellent service to everyone. Even the stock price had recovered and was now higher than it had been before Tyler's incident. But the changes at Skyward Airlines were just the beginning of a much larger transformation. News of what Robert Johnson had accomplished spread quickly through the business community. Other companies with discrimination problems found themselves under increased scrutiny from investors and customers. Some made changes voluntarily, while others waited until they faced their own public relations disasters. 3 other major airlines had contacted Patricia Williams, asking for advice on implementing similar training programs. The Department of Transportation had launched an industry-wide investigation into discrimination practices, using Skyward Airlines as a model for how companies should handle complaints. Robert's success had also inspired other wealthy investors to use their influence for social change. A group of prominent business leaders had formed the Equity Investment Alliance, dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the companies they invested in. Tyler had become something of an accidental activist himself. He had been invited to speak at business conferences and college campuses about the importance of standing up to discrimination. His message was always the same: change was possible, but it required people with power and resources to be willing to use them for the right reasons. The hardest part, Tyler often said in his speeches, wasn't being slapped by that flight attendant. The hardest part was realizing how many other people had probably gone through similar experiences without having the resources to fight back. On this particular morning, Tyler was flying to Chicago for another speaking engagement. As he approached the gate, he noticed a young woman who looked nervous and uncomfortable. She was well-dressed but kept checking her boarding pass as if she couldn't believe it was real. Tyler walked over to her. "First time flying first class?" She looked up, surprised. "Is it that obvious?" "Not obvious, just familiar. I'm Tyler, by the way. Angela. And yes, this is my first time in first class. I used miles I've been saving for 3 years to upgrade for my grandmother's 90th birthday." Tyler smiled. "That's wonderful. You're going to love it. The service is excellent and they really take care of you." As they boarded the plane together, Tyler watched Angela's face light up when the flight attendant welcomed her warmly and helped her get settled in her seat. No questions about whether she belonged there, no suspicious looks, no demands to see her boarding pass multiple times. Just professional, courteous service. The way it should always have been. During the flight, Tyler struck up a conversation with Angela, learning that she was a teacher who had worked extra jobs for months to save up for the trip to see her grandmother. She was exactly the kind of person who deserved to be treated well regardless of which section of the plane she was sitting in. "You know," Angela said as they prepared to land, "I was nervous about flying first class because I'd heard stories about people being treated poorly if they didn't look like they belonged there." Tyler nodded. Those stories were true, unfortunately. But things are changing. What changed them? Tyler considered how much to tell her. He had never gotten comfortable with the attention his story had received, but he had learned that sharing it sometimes helped people understand the importance of speaking up against injustice. "Someone stood up when they had the power to make a difference," he said simply. And it reminded everyone that treating people with dignity isn't just nice to do. It's the right thing to do. As they walked through the Chicago airport together, Angela thanked Tyler for making her feel welcome on her first-class flight. She had no idea that he was the reason the flight attendants had treated her so well, and Tyler preferred it that way. Later that evening, Tyler called his father from his hotel room. "How was the flight?" Robert asked. "Perfect. Exactly the way it should be." Tyler looked out his window at the lights of Chicago. "Dad, do you ever wonder if we did the right thing? Making such a big deal out of what happened to me?" Robert was quiet for a moment. "Tyler, do you remember what you told me the day after it happened? You said you kept thinking about all the other people who might go through the same thing." "I remember. Well, today you met one of those people. Angela, the teacher flying to see her grandmother. A year ago, she might have been treated the way you were treated. But today she had a wonderful experience because we decided to fight for change instead of just accepting things the way they were." Tyler smiled. His father was right. The decision to confront Skyward Airlines hadn't just been about getting justice for one incident. It had been about creating a world where everyone could travel with dignity. "There's something else," Robert continued. "Patricia Williams called me today. Skyward Airlines wants to create a scholarship program for students from underserved communities who are interested in careers in aviation. They want to name it after you. Tyler was surprised. After me? You started something, son. Not just by being brave enough to speak up, but by showing other people that change is possible when we're willing to work for it. What did you tell her? I told her we'd think about it. But Tyler, I think your grandmother would be proud of what you've accomplished. She always said that the measure of a person wasn't how they handled success, but how they responded to injustice. Tyler thought about his grandmother, who had passed away 2 years earlier. She had grown up during the civil rights era and had faced discrimination that made his airplane experience seem minor by comparison. But she had always taught him that progress required people to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Let's do the scholarship program, Tyler said, but not just for aviation careers. Let's make it for any student who wants to work in an industry where they can make positive changes. I like that idea, Robert replied. We'll call it the Tyler Johnson Scholarship for Change. As Tyler prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning on Flight 847. What had started as a humiliating experience had become a catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond one airline or one family. He thought about Angela, flying home to her grandmother with a wonderful story about being treated well by the airline staff. He thought about the dozens of other passengers who would have better experiences because Skyward Airlines had changed its culture. And he thought about all the future Tyler Johnsons who wouldn't have to go through what he had experienced because people had decided to do better. The next morning, Tyler's speech in Chicago focused on a simple message. Change was always possible, but it required people to believe they could make a difference and then take action to make it high. Pippen. 6 months ago, he told the audience, I was just a guy trying to get home from visiting my grandmother. I never planned to become an activist or a symbol of change. But sometimes life puts you in a position where you have to decide whether to accept injustice or fight against it. My father and I chose to fight. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who deserved to be treated better. And because we made that choice, thousands of people now have better experiences when they travel. The question I want to leave you with today is this. When you see injustice, when you have the power to make a difference, what choice will you make? As Tyler finished his speech to thunderous applause, he realized that the slap he had received on that airplane had been the beginning of something much larger than he could have imagined. It had been the start of a movement that would continue long after people forgot his name. And that, he thought, was exactly how real change was supposed to work. 3 years later, the Tyler Johnson Scholarship for Change had sent over 200 students to college, and Skyward Airlines had become the industry leader in customer service and employee diversity. Other companies across various industries had adopted similar programs, creating a ripple effect of positive change that continued to spread. Tyler still flew regularly for his work, but now he saw his story reflected in the faces of passengers who were treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. And every time he saw that respect in action, he was reminded that standing up for what was right had been worth every moment of the struggle that followed. Because in the end, that's what real change looked like. Not a single dramatic moment, but thousands of small interactions where people chose to treat each other with kindness and respect. And it all started with one person deciding that things could be better and then doing the work to make that vision a reality.